What could the opening night roster for the Minnesota Wild look like? We find out today on Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and make sure to tell them Locked On sent you. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we take a look at what the opening night roster could look like. There are a lot of spots already locked up for particular Wild players, but there are still a few spots up for grabs. And with the prospect showcase in the books, we look at who might have the inside track to make those final few spots for the roster. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, veteran of over 10 years of Minnesota sports coverage, including the last couple seasons, exclusively covering your favorite team here in the state of hockey. Happy to have you along for a Tuesday edition of the show. And if you missed the news yesterday, you can catch us now on YouTube. So make sure to subscribe to the Locked On Wild YouTube channel. We'll be bringing you episodes every day, Monday through Friday, as well as video clips throughout the week as well. Small features and short videos to try to bring you as much content as possible. So make sure to subscribe to the Locked On Wild YouTube channel. Turn those notifications on so that you don't miss out on any of the content we have coming up between now and the start of the season. So we talked at length yesterday about the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase and some of the players that really had impressive performances throughout the course of the weekend. So we're going to kind of build off of that in today's show. And we want you to come away after listening to today's show with a little bit of an idea as to the players that could take the final few spots on this Wild roster. Now, for those that maybe aren't super familiar, I mean, for me as well, getting more and more into hockey as we go, always good to know that the NHL rosters consist of 23 players. Now, there are 20 active on game day. You've got 18 skaters and 2 goalies. So that is the framework that we're going to use in putting this roster together. We are going to run through. There are several players that have pretty much locked up spots already. So we will run through that on today's show. We'll go forwards, defense, and goalies, just trying to get a sense of, what are the battles going to be in training camp and where are the spots to really pay attention to this Wild roster as we get going. So let's start with the spot that maybe is the most settled on this roster, that of course being the goalie position. So we'll go goalie, then defense, then forwards to finish things off here for today's episode. Obviously the goalie spot, you've got Cam Talbot and Kaapo Kahkonen. That's pretty solidly set for this Wild team. Talbot's going to be your starter, and then Kaapo is going to be your backup. Now, what the splits look like for these two in an 82-game season is going to be very interesting to see. If we look at kind of what happened with last year, obviously Talbot missed some time due to injury, and so we saw a lot of starts from Kaapo Kahkonen this past season, which was great for his development. Talbot ended up starting 33 games out of the games that the Wild played, so had a healthy portion of the starts for the Wild, and of course did very well. Went 19-8, and then if you look at what Kaapo Kahkonen was able to do, he ended up getting a fair amount of starts as well this past season. So it's going to be nice to see kind of that backup. He had 24 games for the Wild this past season. So pretty even split Talbot did end up getting, the majority share there, but I would expect it to be similar this season, maybe a 50-30 type split in terms of games for Talbot and games for Kaapo, because we do want to try to protect Talbot a little bit as well, from injury and from overload with workload. So I would expect more of a 50-30 split in the starts for the goalies this year. Now, if there is any sort of an injury to either of those two, the name that I think is going to be probably the third goalie for this Wild team, just because he has the experience and is the one that would probably be the least flustered to hop up and play if needed, is going to be Andrew Hammond, who had some good stats in his most recent trips to the NHL level. So I think on any given night, and not necessarily that Hammond is with the team every step of the way, I think Hammond will be the third goalie in the event that the Wild do need to deploy the third goalie at any point during this season. So the goalie spot is the one that we really need to spend the least amount of time talking about. Talbot's your starter. Kaapo is going to be your backup. And if anything happens to either of those two, then Andrew Hammond slots into that spot that is vacated. If Talbot misses time, Kaapo is elevated to your starter, and Hammond slots in as the backup. If Kahkonen misses time, then Hammond is slotted in as the backup, and so on and so forth. So that's really the easy one, and that's not a spot that the Wild really need to devote any time to trying to kind of do mind games with and hurdles. The goalies that will be at Iowa pretty much all season are Derek Barabo and Hunter Jones. Going to be nice to see those guys get another season of development. So the goalie spot pretty short up for this Wild team. So that I would say of the spots with some question marks, I think the goalie position is at the bottom, and then you go. You can flip them. I mean, defense and forwards, there are still spots with questions in both of those portions of the lineup. So goalie spot is taken care of, and that is the least question mark on this Wild roster at this point. Tell you what, we will continue this discussion. We'll move on to the defense and look at where players could potentially take some roster spots. More to come here on Locked On Wild. Today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning? Like, is your Odyssey an LX or an EX? Who knows? And why wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brands their warehouse happen to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Plus, you can save money when using rockauto.com. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? rockauto.com is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. So head to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Make sure to write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. All at rockauto.com. Does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite TV shows, you're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for the good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all of that entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before. So you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, there is no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. Continuing with today's episode of Locked On Wild, looking at what the opening night roster could potentially look like before the start of training camp. Obviously subject to change because we will have plenty of battles for roster spots throughout the course of training camp, which we'll cover here over the next couple of weeks before the season starts in the middle of October. Moving to the defense, and we've got, I think, 5 spots in the starting lineup for the Wild defense that are solidified. Obviously, whether he is on the top pairing or not, Alex Goligoski penciled in. He will be a starter for this team, as will the likes of some guy named Jared Spurgeon. Not sure who he is. Just kidding. Spurgeon will be one of the top members of this defense once again. You've also got then Matt Dumba and Jonas Brodin. Beyond that is where things become a little more interesting. Dmitry Kulikov, I think, probably pencils in as one of the players on that third line. But beyond that, you have quite the list of names that could potentially take some time at the NHL level. I mean, you've got probably the penciled in starter right now in Jordie Benn, who has the most NHL experience. So I would say at this point, he probably is penciled in as the starter, or penned in this case. Penned in as the starter on that third line for this Wild defense. Beyond that, some names that could vie for some playing time. You've got Kalyn Addison, who is basically ready at this point. We've talked about him quite a bit over the course of the offseason and from what he was able to do at the Prospect Showcase this past weekend. Just 21 years old, and he is basically knocking on the door right now for an opportunity with this team. You also have the likes of Dakota Murmus, who did have a cup of coffee with the Wild during the COVID bout last season. You also have, the likes of Ryan O'Rourke, who is a little further away at just 19, but still has shown some very good promise with this team. And so it just depends on the way the Wild want to kind of play this out. If they want that veteran experience to kind of get them going to start the season, then I think you pencil Jordie Benn in as the starter on that third line with Dmitry Kulikov. If you want to take the upside and say we know that he's going to probably struggle to get used to the speed, at least at first, but we want a guy that is going to, give us a ton of upside. That's Kalyn Addison. And so you look at this roster, how it's penned in right now. 12 forwards, 6 defensemen, 2 goalies. That gets you to 20. You have room for a couple of other players to be on the active roster that don't necessarily start every night. I think Kalyn Addison is one of those penned in guys. And I think he just offers so much upside for this team. If there's any sort of injury or if anybody struggles to the point where they get pulled out of the lineup, he needs to be the first call to fill that spot, especially on defense. And so I think, I don't know if there's anything that Addison can really prove at the AHL level that he hasn't already done. So I think at this point, he just breaks camp with the team and starts with the team on the roster. Whether or not he plays every night, I think that is something you just have to kind of figure out as the season goes along. But I think he needs to be just kind of soaking up that NHL knowledge at this point to be a guy that's ready. And I think he just starts with the team and he stays there. That's my personal opinion on it. So whether or not that's what ends up actually happening, I guess we'll wait and see. But I think he would certainly be good enough. But I do understand giving the nod to Ben to start the year with the amount of experience that he brings to the table. So if that's the route they go, I'm totally fine with that. And I would respect Dean Evason's decision if that's ends up being what he decides to do. But I think Addison ends up being the seventh defenseman just because of what he brings to the table. So I'm going to pencil him in as another player that is on this roster, but maybe not active on a nightly basis. So we've penciled in Hammond as the third goalie, and now Addison as the seventh defenseman. We will finish today's episode of Locked On Wild talking about the forward spot. It sounds like, from what Bill Guerin says, there are some open spots available, and we've got some names to fill them. That is next here on Locked On Wild. We are back and better than ever, and all eyes are on the gridiron as teams are back to start another football season. As always, betonline.ag is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. With a new updated site and interface, even more odds, props, and contests, betonline.ag continues to be the number one source for everything football. So head over to betonline.ag on your laptop or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 100% welcome bonus. That's double your initial deposit just for signing up. Don't forget to use the promo code NFL100. From football, basketball, boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. You can find all of that and so much more at betonline.ag, the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. That's betonline.ag, your online sportsbook experts. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. And again, make sure that you are subscribed everywhere you can find any content related to Locked On Wild. Everywhere you listen to podcasts, all the socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our YouTube channel, which, as you can see, is now fully operational. As they said about the Death Star, it is fully armed and fully operational. So make sure to subscribe and turn those notifications on so that you can catch all of our content as we roll it out as the season gets going. Okay, forward spots. This is the one where the Wild have the most opportunity to get creative. So let's just run through the usual suspects. There are players who certainly have earned their roster spots. There are players who, once they are signed, will have a spot on this roster as well. So looking at what we had last year, and I just bunched it together based on the line combinations last year. Those line combinations certainly subject to change. So obviously you've got Kirill Kaprizov, Victor Rask, and Matt Zuccarello. Once Kirill Kaprizov signs, and according to Michael Russo in a tweet that he had from earlier today, he fully expects that Kaprizov will be signed by the time training camp starts. Whether or not he'll be there for training camp obviously is a question with the hurdles that he's going to have to go through in order to get here. That is certainly a viable question, but sounds like he could potentially be signed by the time camp starts, which would then put him on track to start the season with the Wild. That is best case scenario at this point. We'll just have to adjust and go from there if it drags on further. So those three going to be on the roster for sure. You've also got Jordan Greenway, Joel Eriksson-Ek, and Marcus Foligno. Those three going to be on the roster for sure. You also have Kevin Fiala and Ryan Hartman. Those two are going to be on the roster for sure. Add in Freddie Gaudreau, who the Wild signed to a deal this offseason, a 2-year deal, and also Nico Sturm. Those two are going to be firmly in. Bill Guerin had some interesting comments as the prospect showcase was coming to a close that the Wild view 2 forward spots as being open competitions this season. One of those is the spot that Nick Bjugstad currently occupies that he signed to fill this past offseason. The other spot, if you look at Cap Friendly, currently occupied by one Kyle Rowe. So there are definitely 2 spots that are available and will be up for open competition once training camp starts. Now, the obvious two names that are going to be vying for those spots and have a great chance to make it, according to Bill Guerin as well. Matt Boldy and Marco Rossi. We saw so much from them, and we did talk at length about the things that they bring to the table. Those two have a great shot to make the team out of training camp. Now, Kyle Rowe, more of a depth guy. He did play last year sparingly when the Wild had injuries, and we're also dealing with COVID-19 as well. He is a guy that is kind of that next man up. He played when Zach Parise was benched and was injured, and when Nick Bjugstad was down. Didn't do a whole heck of a lot. So penciling him into that spot, I think that is, I'm going to go as far as to say that is Matt Boldy's spot to lose on this roster. And so that spot is certainly up for grabs. Also, the Bjugstad spot. Now, it's interesting that Bill Guerin said 2 forward spots are up for grabs. I think if Marco Rossi makes this team, that Ryan Hartman gets shifted out of a center spot. I think he is just a better fit. The only potential reason that Ryan Hartman would stay as a center is if he slots into center for Jordan Greenway and Marcus Foligno. If they move Joel Eriksson up to play with Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Zuccarello, then you're looking for more of a defensive center, and that could fit nicely with Jordan Greenway and Marcus Foligno. But if that doesn't end up happening, then I think you move Hartman to a wing, and as I said, if he needs to, you move him to that Greenway line. But if not, slide him to a wing and let Marco Rossi center Kevin Fiala's line with Matt Boldy. Then that leaves your bottom line with Ryan Hartman, Nico Sturm, and Freddie Gaudreau, which is not bad. That's not bad for a fourth line. So Boldy and Rossi, they're going to be vying for those 2 spots. Other names that I could see getting a shot to make the team. I mean, Will Bitton is kind of a outside candidate, but I think he more so ends up in Iowa. And this will also depend on the number of players that are brought in for tryouts. We haven't seen that list. I don't think that list has been released as of yet. There will be some names that have NHL experience that are brought in on tryouts to try to take one of those spots as well. But looking at just what the Wild have in the prospect pool, I think it's very, very likely, and becoming more and more likely as we go, that Boldy and Rossi get the inside track to take those spots. Now, obviously, one of them would have to beat out Nick Bjugstad to make the team. And unless you have Bjugstad be kind of the other member of the active roster that doesn't necessarily play every night. In that case, you bump Rowe to Iowa and you put Bjugstad as kind of the written in portion of this roster. In fact, I think we're just going to do that right now. Bjugstad is good injury insurance, and he is definitely a guy that, if given the opportunity, if needed, can fill in and do some good things. So we're moving Hartman to the 4th line. We're going to go Rossi and Boldy on the 3rd line. And yeah, we're set. I think we're set. So Kaprizov, Rask, Zuccarello, Greenway, Eriksson, Foligno, Fiala, Rossi, Boldy, Hartman, Sturm, Gaudreau. Nick Bjugstad is your 13th forward that is on the active roster. On defense, Goligoski and Spurgeon, Dumba, Brodin, Kulikov, and Benn. Addison is the 7th defenseman for the Wild there. And then Talbot and Kahkonen are your goalies, and Andrew Hammond is the 3rd goalie on the roster. So that's your 23. That is certainly one route that the Wild could go to fill the 23-man roster for the start of the season. Now, as I said, training camp will present some tryouts and some opportunities for guys to try to make this roster. So will this be what it looks like in mid-October when the season starts? Probably not. It'll probably be close, but there's going to be some changes to this. And that's the beauty of training camp, is that we got some battles that we will be able to take a look at as we get closer. So that hopefully gives you a little bit better idea of some of the players with inside tracks to make the opening night roster. And this will be something we keep an eye on as training camp goes and as we get closer to the start of the season. That will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. So again, make sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts, also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and our YouTube channel, which is now up and fully functional. Make sure to subscribe and turn notifications on so that you don't miss out on any of the videos we have planned throughout the course of the season. And you can find new episodes of Locked On Wild every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.